companies love to say they're a family,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't fire your mom, right?
Right.
So I used to use, being a musician and being in bands my whole life,
Yeah.
I always thought the band was a better analogy than a family. And so I used to say, we're not a family, we're a band. And
That's
in a
a
band, you have to carry your own equipment. You're responsible for your own stuff. You can't sing too loud or else you're going to, if you're trying to harmonize with someone else and you sing too loud, you're going to screw up the harmony.
Welcome to Brand Storytellers, where we learn from the people who make them happen and discover their secrets to success. Today, our guest is David Baldwin, founder of Baldwin in Raleigh, North Carolina. David has not only built one of the most successful advertising agencies in our industry, but he also has served as the chairman of the One Club for Creativity, the premier creative club in the ad industry. David's life is a story of integrity reflected in his work as an ad maker, a musician, and a writer. I talked with David about this approach and how it affects the success of companies and their brands. Let's see what he has to say.
Well, if you think about what a brand was, what a brand kind of started out as an actual symbol that determined ownership, right?
Right.
So a brand was on a piece of cattle or a sigil that said, "This is my cow. Don't screw with my cows." Right. What it really has come to mean in sort of advertising parlance is a promise of behavior. It's sort of like, this is what we stand for. It's a set of beliefs and values that lives in the marketplace. And now that belief and value could be, we make really great products, or it could be, we're all about reliability, or it could be, we're about precision engineering. Whatever those things are, it's a promise. It's about doing, it's about living and walking your talk as a company. And where you see so much sort of dissociative activity and dissonance with companies is when they say one thing and do something else, right? And it's also like a company like Volvo, which so owned the idea of safety for decades, and really powerfully, they actively kind of tried to get away from it for a while, I think. I mean, I don't have their internal documents, but it seems like they did. And they couldn't. They kind of couldn't, And so you still feel that kind of tension from them. So they told their story and they behaved accordingly so powerfully that it was very difficult to get away from that. So, it really is a very simple way to look at what a brand is and does.
Right.
And most importantly for me, once you know what your belief system is and you've codified your values on paper, it helps you run your company, not just do your advertising. So because it creates a set of behaviors that some of which is communications.
Right. So when you've worked with clients, is getting them to see it that way, has that been a challenge, or do you go after companies that, believe that already and practice that already?
Well, I think, it's chicken and the egg. I mean, I would say that CEOs get it. CEOs and founders get it like that. Like they get it. Where you don't often see people necessarily getting it is marketing people that kind of come from that MBA framework kind of thing, and they have their own framework. You have to sometimes, and their I'm a big believer in frameworks, and I can work within any framework.
Right.
So I'm not saying they're wrong, actually, but when you already have a framework, to get someone to buy into a new framework is a little difficult sometimes.
How do you think brands drift away from that? How does that happen? Why does that happen?
Well, there's such a pressure on us as marketers to make noise now, like I need results right now.
Right.
And I feel that pressure. I mean, I understand it. And I actually created my own companies and have felt that pressure in my own side kind of companies that are, having to get butts and seats or sell product,
Yeah.
But I think, every sort of the science of advertising and marketing is that you should do branding and tactical stuff at the same time.
Yes.
And you create sort of phasing of that. And the brands that get it are undeniably successful. And the ones who don't get it, whenever I hear a company just go, we just need a brand campaign. I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? Like, I don't know what that means to you, because
Yeah.
it's like saying I'm only going to write love songs, as
Right.
a musician or something. So I think, for me, I'm always going to say, well, what are we rooting this in? We need to root it into the truths and the reason the company existed in the first place, and why you exist in the marketplace, and root a lot of this in use your products or your story to prove the branding. And one of the things I was really proud of at Baldwin and is one thing we did really well was we would work the purchase funnel in one idea, like the whole thing in one idea. And a great example of that is, we did this thing for Krispy Kreme where we took the glazer, they call it donut theater, but the glazer, and we turned it into a QR code, right?
I remember that.
And we shot that as a video.
Right.
And what that did was it was awareness. It drove awareness.
Right.
It drove consideration because it was yummy. It drove price because it had a deal on it. It's very Howard Gossage. I'm a huge fan of Howard Gossage.
Me
and
too.
So
Me too.
I feel like all I did was rip Howard Gossage off my entire. And then it worked, and it tracked you as it did all of that sort of work that you want to do below the line. And It was one idea. It was a post.
Right.
And it was the second most engaged post on Instagram the month that it ran in the world. And it did really well on Twitter. It did really well across all social channels. And the assignment was we need to drop an FSI into our top sort of 8 markets, to drive this event called Day of the Dozens. And so we were like, well, that's just going to be another circular in the newspaper. What if we turn this into a brand event? And this kind of gets into, I think, kind of what I call it the weaponization of purpose, where Krispy Kreme's purpose is to create joy through these really wonderful products, right?
Yeah.
This little moment of joy, like we called it the Krispy Kreme effect, where when it walks into the room with a box, everyone goes, oh, like the room just got happy,
Yeah.
And that doesn't have anything to do with social activism,
No.
And purpose sort of got construed as only social activism.
Right.
And so we worked really hard. And by the way, I love that work. And in fact, my brewery, Pony Saurus Brewing, we do that all the time. Mm-hmm. It's not everything we do, but we do it all the time because of it's our belief that you can solve the world's problems over a beer, right? That's what our brewery believes.
Right.
So when you have that, if we're going to bring people together and create empathy over a beer, that's what beer does when you're not drinking by yourself.
Right.
But so
and talking to yourself, that would be not a good idea either.
So I'm a big believer in purpose, sort of in the old school version of purpose, which encompasses social activism, but it's sort of been hijacked as social activism. And I think because it wins awards, honestly, which is, I think, just done no favors to the movement as business as a force for good, or to the movement of sort of award shows and advertising. Right. It's just kind of screwed up everything.
Right. It definitely does.
Yeah. So that's something that I love. However, getting back to the original thing, a brand like Krispy Kreme, when it's super clear that we create joy through these little moments, all you're doing with your advertising is creating joy with little moments using the product. Mm-hmm. That's the brand. That is the brand. And so we drove brand measures. We drove everything with those ideas like that. We had a bunch we did so much stuff like that.
Right.
And we had something like, I think we had 12 of the biggest days in the history of the company, which is 108 years old or whatever it was, however old that 80 years old. I don't remember how old it was at the time, but in the sort of 3 years we worked on it, we drove the biggest days they'd ever had with brand work, I would call brand work, but it was all featuring the product. It always started with the product.
I worked on the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and that was very much a part of everything they did. It was to their core. About ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. That was kind of their thing.
It's one of the best brand expressions I've ever heard.
Was there a passion behind that made those companies come about? Tell us about that.
Well, let me start actually with personal branding, because everything's coming out of personal branding of who I am.
Okay.
And I did my own branding sort of work on myself of what I believe. I really started to write it down. Mm-hmm. And I invite everybody to do that, because and I have a really fun exercise that'll help you do it. You can do it in half an hour easily.
Okay, great.
But my personal sort of feeling of what I exist for is I want to promote, inspire, and create oneness in the world. That's what I'm trying to do. And I feel like as I've gotten into the latter half of my life, that's what I've been focused on, is trying not to be divisive. We live in such a divisive culture.
I know it's
Things are
tiring.
so bad. And I fail at this all the time. But even when I talk politics on social media, I'm always trying to understand. I try not to attack, you know.
Right. Right.
Even if I'm provocative, I try to be understanding and not attack people and things like that. So when I started Baldwin and, it was with that in mind of how do we create a company that is additive to the world and additive to the industry and additive to the business and additive to our clients' lives and their work, you know? And within that, I had said early on, before we had a company, I wrote up in my attic, I wrote like what the company was. And one of the things I wrote was, we're going to make our own luck. We're going to be our own clients. But we started a number of things, and we encouraged our employees to start their own things as well. And so almost everybody at the agency, half the agency, I'm going to say that, has a side gig that's a gig that's actually a thing. You know, my partner Bob Renew has a motorcycle company called Redeemed Motorcycles, where he rebuilds, and he's one of the top rebuilders. He's one of the top rebuilders in the world. He's been featured in motorcycle magazines around the world, and it's incredible. And the work he does is incredible.
I've got to see it, man. I love that. That's great.
Yeah, you should check him out.
I will.
It's incredible.
I will.
And my partner Jerry Beaudry makes guitars. He builds guitars, incredible guitars. And an art director there named Matt Wood has a woodworking company. And Jennifer Matthews, our design director at the time. I keep saying I'm not there anymore. Right. But Jen Matthews is an incredible artist, and
I've got a feeling you still are there.
I might be there in spirit, but
you are.
Yeah,
I'm sure you are.
But yeah. So I mean, just so many of us have some other thing, and it was because we valued that. That's something we valued as an agency, was personal expression and creating economies around our personal ambitions and sort of passions. Right.
Right. So, makes it possible.
Yeah. So all that said, I didn't drink for 25 years. Like I stopped drinking in my early 20s. I just didn't drink. I was raised by an alcoholic, and I was like, I'm not going to drink. I don't want to be an alcoholic.
Right.
And when the craft beer thing happened, a friend of mine up the street was making beer, and he was like, you want to come over and help make beer? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I went up and we started making beer, and I was like, wow, this is really good, you know?
Yeah.
And I would drink it like once every 2 weeks and go, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not dying to drink, you know? Yeah. And so really got into beer and decided, you know, the agency should start a brewery. What if this is one of our brands, that we started a brewery? And met a couple of other guys in town that also wanted to start a brewery. And we started Pony Saurus. And again, but I think what was really great was, before there was sort of liquid in bottles, we created the brand together. We decided that, you know, we wanted to build community. We said, like, we're not just going to build beer, we're going to build community.
Right.
And how do we create sort of a place for people to come together and commune over beer? And so everything we do is around that, everything, you know, and all of the events that we do, all of the way we've designed the tap rooms, like everything comes out of this very simple brand idea of, you know, we don't just make beer, we build community. And we have the saying, which is, you know, you can solve the world's problems over a beer.
Right.
And in 2016 or 17, called Don't Be Mean to People, and it raises money for the LGBTQ community. And it still does. It's one of our, but it's it's another great example of really smart business, but also living our brand. Like when you say we build community and we solve problems over beer, that was a problem that we wanted to have a part in, you know?
Right.
And it's become one of our top sellers, and it gets us into all kinds of doors. And, you know, it's a smart business.
How did you come up with that name?
I had to step back with Pony Saurus. One of the things that we didn't do was sort of enter the naming arms race, because Pony Saurus is such a fun, silly name already. We were like, we're not going to also have Optimum Pleasure and, you know, all these other names, where so many breweries, like a brewery like New Belgium almost got trapped by Fat Tire, right? Because Fat Tire was like this huge amount of their volume. And Fat Tire had a better brand than New Belgium did. And they've really successfully, I think, worked their way around that. But it took a while. And so we just didn't want to do that. We're like, Pony Saurus is always the brand, right?
Right.
And so when even to this day, it's Pony Saurus IPA, it's Pony Saurus, you know, Rye Pale Ale, it's whatever it is, it's always Pony Saurus. So when we decided to create Don't Be Mean to People, we worked with a company called Mystery Brewing in town that's no longer around. Fantastic brewery. And their head brewer, this guy Eric, was incredible. And he and Kyle, were like, we're gonna use ingredients. We worked with 40 other breweries around the state to create that beer. And then it was like, okay, well, what do we name it? And we had all kinds of names, and I can't even remember all the names that we had, but the one that won was, I think a guy named Chad Temples wrote "Don't Be Mean to People."
Right.
I think he came up with that name.
Right.
But and then Kellen McGarity, who's now a bigwig at Preacher, was the designer on it. She designed it. It's this really timeless, simple, beautiful design.
Right.
And so that's how it happened.
When you're talking about building your personal brand and everything, was that part of it?
It really was. So the idea was, companies love to say they're a family, but you can't fire your mom. Right.
Right.
So I used to use, being a musician and being in bands my whole life.
Yeah.
I always thought the band was a better analogy than a family. And so I used to say, we're not a family, we're a band. And in a band, you have to carry your own equipment. You're responsible for your own stuff. You can't sing too loud, or else you're going to, if you're trying to harmonize with someone else and you sing too loud, you're going to screw up the harmony.
Right.
Like if you're, occasionally, so I was lead guitar, and occasionally I would step forward and take a guitar solo, but at the end of the day, I was helping huff equipment, and, I was part of the band.
That's great.
And it felt like a really good analogy to me.
I love it. I love it.
And if you shorten Baldwin and, it's B and band. And that was a fortuitous coincidence, but
right.
It was amazing. It was like, oh my gosh, so that's where lead guitar came from. And then the idea was like, well, how do we let people create a title that's the thing they want to bring to the company?
Right.
We have to have our official titles for billing and all that stuff, but
right.
Like, what do you want to be here? Like, what do you want to be? And I had one guy was like, well, can I be the CEO? And I'm like, be the CEO of something.
I like that. You didn't deny, you allowed. That's good.
Yeah, like, what do you want to be the CEO of?
Right.
And so, but like, we had this guy, Ian Fairbrother, who, one of the just most delightful guys. I was so sad when he left, but his title was Laugh Track. And it's because he was just like, you're going to hear me laughing all the time. And we had kind of an open environment. And so he was just laughing all the time.
Yeah.
And he was like 3 months in, like, see, I'm the laugh track.
I love
He's like,
the
I'm
joy.
always going to keep things happy and laughing here. So
that's important. We have to have a sense of humor in this industry.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Boy, do you.
If you were advising someone on doing what you've done, being where you are at that point in life when they come to it, would you advise them to do what you've done?
That's a hard question to answer, Bart, because I don't think the business is the same,
Definitely.
So I don't know how to answer that. I think the way I always looked at my career was keep moving up, keep moving up, keep moving up. And I knew when I was when I was 26, I wanted to have my own agency.
Yeah.
And I knew I would do it. In fact, I almost started one with my first partner, Steve. We almost started one in the 80s in New York. And I'm really glad we didn't, because we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
And it would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
But I had that in my head of prepare yourself to own your own thing at some point. What do you need to learn? What do you need to surround yourself with? And how can you get the skill set you need to do that as you grow? Mm-hmm. So I had a destination, and retiring was part of it. Retiring like early was part of my quest. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And the reason is people don't get out on their own terms in this business. A lot of people don't get out on their own terms.
No, they do not.
And I was like, I'm getting out on my own terms if I can. Like if I'm successful, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And I learned early on to surround myself with people better than me at something. They got to be better than you at whatever you can't do.
That's right.
And I've always been a pretty good writer, but like everything else, I had to surround myself with people that are better than me at that,
Right.
And what happens is when you surround yourself with better people, you have to raise your game, especially if you're leading them.
That's right.
If you're the leader and they're better than you, you gotta be on your toes, man.
Yeah. Same thing with the band. Same with the band.
Absolutely. It's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. If you put yourself with musicians better than yourself, it's going to make you a better musician,
Absolutely.
So I would say that's probably the applicable thing
Hmm.
The thing that I see with a lot of kids now is they don't know what they want to do. They don't know where they want to go. And
Exactly.
I don't know if I was just lucky that I did or what that was, but I knew where I wanted to go. I knew what I wanted to do. I also knew I wanted to play music during the whole thing, and I have, which is like that's been part of my journey because I was like, I'm not
Right.
giving that up,
Right. Right. Right.
but I knew where my bread was buttered, and I
Yeah.
knew I kind of had a plan, and I executed that plan. But I think articulating your plan is is half the battle.
Yeah. So
Saying what you want to be and do is a huge part of being and doing it.
it really is. So how did talk about that part of your life a little bit?
Yeah.
How did you learn that this is what you wanted to do?
I knew when I was 18 and I was touring in a band. I was in a band called Jet, hilariously, because there's a not that Jet.
Yeah.
I knew when I was 18 that if I think I said by the time I'm 20, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember the exact date, but
Hmm.
I was like, if by the time I'm 20, if I don't have an indication that I can make a living playing music, I'm going into advertising because my mother was in advertising.
Oh, okay.
My mother was a media director at an ad agency in El Paso, Texas.
Really?
And
Okay.
and so I grew up seeing like the creative dudes in the back, they're all
Yeah.
dudes
Yeah.
in the back and going like, that looks fun. Like, what are they doing? They
Yeah.
all had big drawing tables and all that stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I just thought that was I was like, well, that's a way to use your creativity,
Right.
still make a living sort of as a creative person
Right.
and yet create,
Yeah.
opportunity. And when I hit 20, I went, when I was in a band that almost got very close to being signed,
Wow.
and we didn't get signed. And when that happened, I went, I think that's as close as I'm getting for a long time. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Right.
Now that might be short sighted, and maybe I sold that out, but I just felt like, I'm gonna stick with what I said I would do. And by the time I was 20, I was like, I'm hitting advertising hard, and I was in
Right.
college, and
Yeah.
and I had missed a year of college because of being on the road, and all my friends were a year ahead of me, and so I was like, I was head down, and I worked. I got through the University of Texas in three years. Mark Cuban had this great saying that I heard years ago that I thought was really great, and I used it with my kids too. But it's like, follow your effort, not your passion. Like, where do your
Right.
efforts naturally go?
Right.
Because your efforts naturally go somewhere. And some people, it's like video games,
Right.
whatever it is. Well, can you do that? Like that really resonated with me. I've always kind of followed my efforts of what I'm into right now.
Right.
And I've been fortunate, but also deliberate in being a creative person and just being a creative person. I
Right.
output creativity. I try to be a creative person and live as a creative person, no matter what that means. And I don't necessarily judge the output. You don't judge the output, you just create, and
Right.
so I've been the producer on some movies, and I've been doing music,
Yeah.
and I've written a book, and I'm just a creative person.
How does a company that's maybe like yours starting from scratch, how do you attract people that are better than you to your company before maybe it's made its mark?
I think that, well, there's discernment, and you have it or you don't, right? That someone is good. I
Right.
mean, that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And you do grow a muscle as a creative director to discerning good people.
Right.
Right. And I think you also have to judge their their personality and who they are,
Yep.
and their integrity.
Right.
It's a huge thing. And I've made that mistake where you hire the prima donna and you're like, they destroy the company. They
Oh,
actually, even if they do something good, they destroy it. I would say it this way: you have to not be threatened by people better than you. And I've met so many people who get threatened by
right.
really good people,
Right.
and I've never had that problem. I'm not an alpha male kind
No.
of personality,
Right.
which when I do get around alpha males, like, I think they think I'm a schmuck. I mean, because I don't have that. I'm pretty competitive, but I don't
Yeah.
have that. I don't have that thing. I don't have that alpha thing. I grew up with
No.
sisters, man.
Yeah.
I'm not threatened by women.
Yeah.
I've always surrounded myself with really smart, powerful, great women.
Yeah.
Um,
And they
and
can definitely make you better.
oh my God,
Yeah.
listen, you want to have a successful company, you hire great women.
That's right.
Because they've got I don't want to say a better work ethic, they have a different work ethic. They have the ability to multitask and deliver and be accountable in a different way than men. I'm not saying men can't.
No.
But they have a different ability to do it. And if you're a person who's threatened by that, I feel bad for you.
What was the number one thing that they needed to do to succeed?
Well, I have to turn this on its head a little bit, because I think what I would say is when you say who you are and you behave like who you are, you attract a certain kind of person.
True.
So it does a lot of the work for you. And the scary thing as a leader is when you put these principles out there, when you're hiring somebody and you tell them this is what we're about, man, they hold you to it.
They do.
You know what I mean?
They do.
And I'll give you an example of that. For us, years ago, we had an opportunity for one of the big cigarette companies wanted to hire us is a strong thing. They were considering us for a big project to do television for a smoking cessation campaign.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to do an anti-smoking thing. And I was like, this is right up our alley. It's lucrative. Like, we can try to help people smoke. So we used to do this thing where we call it coffee canning, where we put a coffee can out on a table and say anonymously, say yes or no, you want to work on the opportunity, right? Because whenever I wasn't sure, I would say, like, let's just ask everybody if they want to work on this, because I don't want people working on something they don't want to work on.
Well, that's great.
And overwhelmingly, the answer was no way.
Right.
And so I pulled my head of strategy, Ashley, aside, and I said, what do you think's going on here? And she was like, well, I'm one of the big no's. And I was like, well, why?
Yeah.
And she said, it's blood money, man. Do you think this company wants you to stop smoking?
Yeah.
They're doing it because they have to.
Right.
And we're going to be a cog in the machine helping a company disguise its sort of true motivations.
Right.
And so we didn't do it.
Right.
And I would have done it.
Yeah.
I was excited because I was like, I think this is on that line where
You're actually doing good, and who cares where the money's coming from?
Yeah, do some powerful work,
right?
Do some good,
right?
Make some money,
right?
Like, those are the sort of three things that
right.
like motivated us: was how do we create economic value with something good? That's that's what we always tried to do, and the culture wouldn't let me.
Well, and
we got into the Maserati pitch. This is a lot. This is like maybe year 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
We got into the Maserati pitch against the Richards Group and like Wyden. It was like all these big agencies. And I said, you know what, guys, I think we should pitch this. And I put it out to the company and I said, do you want to pitch it? And everyone was like, yeah, I think this is worth it. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. And it's the first thing we had pitched in a really long time. And we got to the first round. And I probably shouldn't be saying this. I guess I'm retired, so who cares? But we got
to the power of freedom.
We got to the first round, and the client there was like, no, I like that. And then was like, here's what I need you to do. And just literally started writing the work. And I don't mind that, actually, if it's good. Like, to me, that's just another voice. But then said, you have to produce this. You actually have to produce. This has to be produced. And I went, okay, I don't mind the co-creating with a client. I really don't mind that. I think that's fun, you know? But when it became, you got to also produce it, I went, look, man, I said, we went back to the agency and everybody talked. And I was like, do we want to spend $60,000 producing this work? You know, this campaign of TV spots and stuff where you're
still pitching here, right?
No, this was the pitch.
Right.
And he goes, look, everyone else has to do it too.
Yeah.
And I was like, but we're 13 people in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, I can scale this thing up like that. Like, we had a network. We could be 45 people tomorrow,
right.
You know?
Right.
I was like, but I have to pay for that.
Right.
And I was like, if you can pay for that, we will continue. And he said, no, we're not going to pay you to do that. And I went, we're out. So we resigned in the middle of the pitch. And I had to go back to the company and go like, hey, listen, everyone, here's why we made this decision.
Yeah.
I know we decided we were going to do it, but the in for a penny, in for a pound, we're not in for a pound. No. We're not going to do it. And so we didn't do it. And what that creates in the company is they're not lying. They're not kidding around.
Exactly. Because
we're going to live our principles here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to the point where you might not grow.
Right. But it
ended up creating growth.
Yeah, and you do grow. That's the thing.
Yeah, it creates an engine. A well-placed no is a really powerful thing.
That's right. And
I do essentially think you should say yes to opportunity.
Right.
but a well-timed no is everything when it
Well,
starts to go against your beliefs and values.
absolutely. And you know what that does is that tells your employees how much you're in it for them as well. And you
Yeah,
don't want to
absolutely.
abuse their trust. You don't want to abuse them as people, because if you're spending that $60,000, that's $60,000 off your bottom line that could go back into that company, could go back into them. So
Absolutely.
that's a great story. And companies that ask for that, to me, they're showing their character, and that cannot match
Listen,
yours.
totally. And
Yeah.
that was the other thing is like, do we want this client that's going to always do this to us? There's one very simple exercise to get to your values and to get to sort of your personal brand. I got this from somebody else. I didn't make this up, but what you do is you make a list of 5 companies that you admire, and then you write a list of descriptors next to them.
Mm-hmm.
You can write a sentence or just words. You can say, I love Nike because they're courageous. They're, they live to a set of values. They make great product, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you make a list of people that you admire and you say why you admire them. And then you take the people away and the company away, and that's who you are.
Right.
Because what you're doing is saying what you value.
Right.
And if you just told somebody, hey, write down what you value, you'd go, kittens, I don't know. But when you do it in that context, you can't see it in another company unless it's within you. And what you're doing is you're saying what you value.
Yeah.
So you get rid of that, and now what you have is you have all this language around what you value.
Right.
And then from there, you can create your personal sort of brand. Now, like every brand, there are times where you got to get tactical, and you're not going to live that value. But it creates a way of articulating what you're into and what you want to be. That for me has been really powerful.
When you misstep, how has that felt, or what have you done?
You have to just acknowledge it and move forward,
right.
and apologize if it's hurt someone,
right.
Right. And listen, as an agency, there were times where I was like, look, we have to take this.
Mm-hmm.
We got to take this.
Yeah.
I know we said we would not take something like this, but we have to.
Yeah.
Or else who are we laying off?
Yeah.
And one of the really great ways, one of the great ways to deal with problematic situations, when somebody brings you a problem, you just put them in charge of it.
That's exactly right.
Right. So if someone comes and goes, this sucks because this blah, 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 blah. I hate that at this company. You go, you're now in charge of that. You're now the head of fixing that.
Right.
And it either goes away and gets fixed, or they stop talking about it.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it gets fixed.
Oh yeah.
A lot of times they'll get fixed, you know? And so I feel the same way with when you screw something up, you just need to be in charge of fixing it and apologizing. And absolutely. I'm not somebody who's afraid of apologizing.
No, and nor you
up.
should be, because you're human, and other people's are human. Nobody's perfect.
I used to ask creative directors, what do you? Because I was always fascinated with this because it was always a rough thing for me. Was the assignment's shitty.
Yeah.
You got to put somebody on it. What do you tell them? How do you motivate them to do it?
Right.
And my favorite answer to that question was a guy named Steve Micklin, who used to be the CCO at Taxi up in Canada.
Yeah.
And he goes, I point at the lights and I go, your turn. It's like your turn to keep the lights on.
Right.
Like, you got to do this.
Right.
And you got to apply the same level of passion and smartness, that you would to any job to it. Yeah. And make this client really, successful and happy.
This has been amazing, and I knew it would be. I knew it would be.
So fun to catch up.
I just want to tell you how much the work that you guys did spurred me on, and spurred those that I worked with on, because I would use Baldwin as an example. I said, these guys are like us in size and all that, and look what they're doing. We may have our own personal challenges, our own situation, but that doesn't mean we can't make something happen. They're making it happen. It's not any easier for them. So,
absolutely.
So thanks for that example.
I have to say, I feel the same way about you, Bart, because everywhere you went and everywhere you go, great work happens. And that's not an accident.
No.
And I've always admired your work, and I've always looked at it and said, we got to be that good,
Oh,
so
boy.
It goes both ways.
I can't say anything to that. That's overwhelming. Thank you.
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
Thank you. So give me something that's on the horizon line for you that maybe is in the future that we don't know about.
Well, I still have the brewery, and we're opening different locations. We just opened in Wilmington, North Carolina. We're opening in Raleigh in a few months. And that's going really well. And there's been some strategic switch, kind of switch arounds because of COVID, but we've come out of it really strong, which is great.
Yeah.
And then I'm also in a band. I'm in a band called the Gumbies, and we put out a single about every 8 to 12 weeks, and just having a blast.
Are you on Spotify or something? I'll get on there.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're on all the streamers.
Okay,
yep.
Good.
So
yeah, I'll definitely get on
just
and
look for
start
the Gumbies.
following.
So the quick story of the Gumbies is my good friend James Thompson, who I was in a band with when I was touring when I was 18. We were in a band called Jet, and the band broke up, and James and the drummer Ray and I were like, the guitar player, this guy Charlie, still a dear friend of mine, went to music school. He left and he quit the band, and we were like, well, we could either keep going. Suddenly just bands fall apart like that. That's one guy leaves and it just goes away.
Yeah.
And so we were going to start a band called the Gumbies in 1981, maybe.
Yeah.
And we were going to do a 3-piece band and just be about sort of power pop, which I love. I love power pop. And then I ended up going to school. Going to school instead.
Right.
And when I turned 60, my wife flew James into town as a gift, and just to play music together.
Oh, that's fantastic!
And he came over and we wrote 4 songs, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to call my friend Grady and let's go record them.
Yeah.
And we recorded them and we put out an EP, and we're like, I think we're doing the Gumbies. And so my friend James lives in Colorado, and he's a multi-instrumentalist. I'm a guitar player and singer.
Right.
He plays everything.
Yeah. I love guys like that. It's amazing.
Oh, he's incredible.
Yeah.
And I wish we lived in the same town, but we're doing everything kind of remotely that way. But we just started putting out music, and it's just been so damn fun. We're just, again, it's putting out art with no judgment. It's just putting stuff out, and I don't know if it's any good. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea if it's any good.
Well, I'll definitely get on Spotify and start following you, because I didn't realize you had a band going right now. So that's great.
Yeah, I'll send you a link.
Love the name too.
It's fun. Yeah, me too. It's actually, we're named after the Monty Python. What's so funny is you think we're named after Gumby, but we're actually named after the Twits with the white handkerchiefs.
Yeah.
They were named the Gumbies.
That's right. Wow.
Yeah, from Monty Python.
Well, great. Okay, well, we'll catch up again.
All right, brother.
I don't know about you, but I want to live and work as David does. Please leave a comment with your thoughts and tell us about other brand stories you'd like to hear. And remember to subscribe so we can grow and make more stories about brands. We'll see you soon.